I saw something ate my sister. Now no one will believe me. Yeah, pretty messed up, right? This might be the only place people will believe what has happened to me and my sister. My name is Connor and I'm 16 years old. I haven't seen my little sister Carly, 13, in 3 months. It all started on a Friday night. My sister was due to go off to summer camp for 6 weeks the next day. She seemed really excited and would be smug with me, as I was working for my summer. I mean, I didn't mind. I was just thinking about all the cash I would make. I never really liked going to camp anyway. My parents were going to leave early in the morning to drop her off. I had decided that I would have one last bit of fun before she went. I was going to sneak into her room, hide in her closet, and jump out on her when she came in. It was late, maybe about 10:30. She was in the study with Mom and Dad, packing the last few things. I had gone to bed earlier stating that I was sick. Of course Carly stayed well away from me. She didn't want anything ruining the start of camp. I made it look like I was in bed, with a combination of pillows and an old Halloween mask with a similar hair color to mine. If anyone checked, it would look as if I was asleep. I crept across the hall over to my sister's room. I left the room in darkness as I placed myself into her closet and shut the door. A smile brandished across my face as I thought how brilliant this would be. It had become a game on how much we could scare each other over the years. I thought that this was going to be perfect, the best one yet. After around 5 minutes, I heard her say goodnight to our parents and make her way up the stairs. She strutted into the room. You could see the excitement in her movements. She then stopped. I thought she had noticed me. She couldn't have. I didn't make a sound and I could only see her through the wooden paneled door. Her expression changed in an instant to an emotionless stare, her arms now by her side. She walked slowly to the middle of the room. She slowly laid her back on the floor. I was just about to jump out when I heard what sounded like floorboards creaking from the corner of the room. I couldn't see anything, my view was restricted, but the room now felt bitterly cold and silent. I saw a tall humanoid figure emerge from the darkness. It was a deep red color with visible muscles and veins, as if it was a result of someone being skinned alive. It glided over to Carly, its long arms with elongated fingers swaying, nearly brushing the floor. Its large flat feet, each equipped with 4 talons, stopped behind her head. It crouched down. I could see its terrifying face. Its sharp eyes almost looked like that of a lizard. Its nose was nothing more than a small mound with 2 large holes. Carly was frozen solid as it opened its mouth, exposing what looked like hundreds of razor-sharp teeth. I was in shock, covering my mouth with my hand, trying to mask my now irregular breathing. My heart was pounding against my chest. It felt so loud I was sure it would hear. Its jaw seemed to dislocate itself like that of a snake as it smothered its mouth over my sweet sister's head. I should have done something, should have attacked it, but my body was stiff. I couldn't move even if I wanted to, with my back pressed against the icy wall. This thing was now up to the top of her torso. I closed my eyes as tears ran down my face. This was the last thing I remember. I must have blacked out or something. I woke the next morning, a crumpled mess at the bottom of the closet. My eyes stuck together with the tears of last night. I slowly opened the closet door as I was shrouded in sunlight. The room was empty. Only a few clumps of my sister's hair where she was laying remained. I went into my room, my decoy still in the same position as where I had placed it in my bed. I wearily walked downstairs, calling out for my mom and dad. I was answered only by my own echo. I got my cell out of my pocket, only 5% battery. I called each of them one after another, nothing. I was still a mess after what I had witnessed last night. That thing was on a loop in my mind. I went back into my room and spent the next hours calling my parents. 3 hours later my cell began ringing. I nearly jumped off my bed, it scared me that much. It was my mom. I said, "Where are you? You need to come home now." She said back, now concerned, "What's the matter?" We have just dropped off your sister." My face now drained of blood. She's alive?" My mom came back confused. "Of course, darling. What do you mean?" I responded in disbelief. "Nothing. I'll speak to you when you get home, okay, honey, bye." The line went dead. I sunk my head into my hands. An hour later, I heard the door open. My parents were back. I ran up to them. I blurted in a frenzy, "How was Carly? Is she okay?" My dad said she was fine. I then proceeded to tell them both what I saw last night. They both looked at me like I was crazy, like I was sadistic. I tried so hard to tell them it wasn't my imagination. I showed them the decoy, the hair on the floor, the closet I was in. My pleas only met by anger and the words, "Don't make such horrible things up, boy," by my dad. I was getting barely a couple of hours of sleep in the weeks after. The job at my uncle's store was my only escape from the flashbacks of that night. 2.5 months have now passed and Carly was due to come home 3 weeks ago, when I asked my parents why they hadn't gone to get her yet. They just said to me that she met a friend at camp and was staying with her for a couple of weeks. I have been trying to call her cell constantly, her voicemail now full. School starts next week. She was supposed to be home from her friends 2 days ago. My parents have been trying to get me to go to see a psychiatrist as I won't stop saying what I saw. I have been refusing, stating that they are lying to me. They don't seem concerned at all. I constantly ask them when she is home. All they reply with is, "In a few days." I know what I saw. It happened right in front of my eyes. I now have the horrible feeling that I will never see my sister again. The witching hours. I am 49 years old, 50 in only a couple of months. Too old to be frightened of the stories my grandmother told me during the long winter nights, when my parents were visiting their friends and it was just the two of us sitting in front of the fire. I shouldn't even remember them. And yet, I still avert my gaze from the bathroom mirror if I happen to be there between midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning. I've heard people refer to those hours as the witching hours. My grandmother never called them that or any other name. When I asked her why shouldn't I look in the mirror at that time of night, she just shrugged her shoulders and simply said, "Because they look back. And once they see you." She left the rest of the sentence hanging there, unfinished, unspoken, in the space between us. She didn't need to say it. We both knew what she was saying. Like I said, I am too old to be thinking about silly stories told by an elderly woman to entertain and, in equal measure, frighten a gullible child. It's not her stories that stop me looking in the mirror in the middle of the night. For that, I have stories of my own. There is a basement under my father's house, as large as the whole footprint of the ground floor. There is no way to access it from the house itself. For that, I would have to go out of our front door, turn right at the corner of the house and then descend the steep concrete steps, 11 of them, to the gloomy space under our home. I hated that basement. It was dark and cold and smelled funny. Worst of all, that's where she was. An old woman who lived in that basement. No, not lived, as she wasn't a living creature, yet she occupied that space as fully and as easily as she occupied and terrorized my childhood. The memory of her goes all the way back to my earliest recollections. She was always there, lurking, waiting. She was my first. In the beginning, it was just this unsettling presence that was concentrated at the bottom right corner of the basement. The space there appeared slightly darker compared to the rest of the room, like the light itself struggled to penetrate it all the way through. Over the next few weeks, it seems to grow bigger, spreading further into the room, claiming more of the space for itself. It felt fuller, heavier, gaining mass and a shape, until I was able to see her in the corner of my eye. You all know what I am talking about, that moment when your brain says, "Wait, what was that?" and your eyes are trying to focus on the fast, blurry image that flashed by, just at the periphery of your vision. At first, my primal fear seemed to satisfy her. I would sense her menacing presence and would immediately break into tears. I would call out to my mother or my father and try to explain what I saw. I would beg them not to ask me to go down there. Nobody believed me, of course. "You are just a scared child with a vivid imagination," they would say. But as I grew, so did her need for my terror. She wasn't there all the time. Sometimes, there would be a month that passed by, possibly even longer, just long enough for me to stop looking over my shoulder and start hoping that it was over. Maybe I imagined it all. Then the torment would start all over again, stronger than before. Few of these incidents were particularly terrifying, and even after all these years I still remember the details with crystal clarity. One summer evening, I could not have been older than 10, I walked up the few stairs leading to my parents' front door. I opened the door and entered the long hallway that led to the living room. I remember that it was an unusually bright moon that evening. I could clearly see the entire hallway, so I didn't bother to switch the light on. It has been a while since I saw her last, so she wasn't at the forefront of my mind. As I approached the living room door, the sense of dread suddenly washed over me, my skin breaking into goosebumps and cold, tingly electric shock ran down my spine. I could feel her before I had a chance to see her, and as I looked up, I saw her pale face looking right above me. This was the first time that I saw her so clearly. That night her face was permanently etched into my brain. I can see it now. Her skin had a yellowish, waxy shine to it, and her face was lined with deep creases. I could plainly see the droopy folds above and under her pale, gray eyes. Her hair was shoulder length, black but heavily peppered with gray hairs, uncombed and unruly. She was smiling, no, not smiling, more like grinning at me. Something just wasn't right about it. Her lips were thin, stretched over her gums and exposing too many teeth. The worst of all was yet to come as that wide grin stretched wider, impossibly wide, and the high-pitched scream filled my ears and my head. I ran outside as fast as my 10-year-old legs would carry me. I remember willing them to move as they felt wooden and so very, very heavy. I could hear my parents and their friends gathered around the barbecue at the very bottom of the garden, happily chattering away, completely oblivious to the horror I was living through at that very moment. I sprinted towards them. I almost made it too. I was just about to round the corner of the house when she was right in front of me again, with that horrible scream coming out of that wide gap on her face that shook every nerve in my body. I tripped and fell onto the sharp corner brick of the house, cutting a deep gash into my chin. By the time I reached my parents, the front of my t-shirt was soaked in blood. I ended up with 3 stitches in my chin, and all these years later that scar is still visible and a permanent reminder of her. After that, the game was on. She would come and go as she pleased. She was no longer constrained just to the basement. She was free to roam the house and torment me. The only other member of the family that would catch at least a glance of her was my grandmother. I, however, seemed to be her favorite toy. My terror fed her. My bedroom was at the far end of the house. I liked it there. The distance from the other bedrooms in the house offered a much-needed privacy from the rest of the family, as it hid my nocturnal screams and sons to some degree. My bed was pushed against the wall, lengthwise, under the large window. That left 3 sides of it open. On the nights she would come, she would start pacing at the top of the bed, then down the full length of it until she finally stopped at my feet. And then back up again. Her steps would be slow and deliberate. Now and then she would pause in her pacing, and I would strain my young ears, hiding under the bed covers, trying to figure out if she finally left me in peace for the night. More often than not, the pacing resumed shortly after with increased intensity, and the taunting continued like the previous countless nights. Now and then, she would yank on my hair that was protruding out from under the duvet, and I would scream and scream. My parents were at the end of their patience with my night shenanigans, as they put it. Maybe I needed professional help. After all, aren't I too old to be crying at night? I learned to bite down on the pillow and smother the screams on the nights that she was in a particularly vicious and playful mood. She would keep me awake night after night, periodically pacing, whispering or screaming in my ears. And life went on. 2 days before I left my parents' house, she made sure to send me off with a parting gift. I was 18 years old, and I hadn't seen her for a long time, at least a year. I finally grew out of my imagination, or so I told myself. That night I went to sleep, and a few hours later something woke me up. I sat up in bed and listened to the quiet groans and noises that all old houses make, but apart from those familiar sounds all was quiet. I lay back down, covered my head with the duvet and was ready to go back to sleep, when suddenly, the loud scream bounced inside my head. It did not come through my ears. This horrifying scream just stuffed my brain, so fully and completely that there was no room left for a single, coherent thought. Then something pulled my hair, so hard that I felt my scalp lifting off my skull. The bed covers were yanked off me in one sleek motion. The room was icily cold. I jumped and threw myself at the direction of the light switch, but where once was an empty space between me and the wall with the light switch on, was now occupied by her. I wasn't a child anymore. I was tall enough that my eyes were on the level with hers. I saw her hooded gray eyes staring at me, the pure malice shining in them, and then I heard the familiar scream wailing out of that wide grinning mouth. I felt her bony fingers closing around my wrists, squeezing harder and harder. Somehow I managed to rip myself away from her grip and hit the light switch, and her face vanished with the bright light filling the room. But I could still hear the screams. It took me a minute to realize that I was the one screaming. I cannot describe to you the sense of relief I had when I left my parents' home. I was tired of her, and I was tired of doubting my own sanity because of her. I never saw her again. I was away from a family home for a couple of years, and when I came back, she was gone. Maybe she moved on looking for another child to terrorize, or maybe my absence starved her of pure fear she fed on and was forced to return to the hell she crawled out of. I don't know, and I don't want to know. I was ready to write her off as a figment of an overactive, childish imagination that lingered around for way too long, until my grandmother said to me, "My poor child, none of my other children see them." I thought it stopped with me, but it didn't. It just skipped a generation. Like I said at the beginning of this story, she was my first. Many, many followed. Most of them were just lost and searching for their loved ones, some completely unaware that they are dead, some trapped here by their own pain. Few were like her, feeding off the fear of the living. But that is a story for another time. Something more important is on my mind. I have 3 children now, 2 sons and a daughter. I was hoping that it stopped with me, or maybe they were lucky and it skipped a generation. When my middle son was around 6 years old, roughly the same age I was when I saw her for the first time, he started waking up screaming in the night. "It's just night terrors, honey," I would tell him while hugging his trembling little body close to me. "It's a bad dream, that is all. Mama is here, don't be afraid." "What did you see?" "I saw a little boy, Mama," he said, and he asked me to swap lives with him. His life is mine. The only thing I could tell him throughout his childhood was this: just remember, do not look in the mirror after midnight and before 3 o'clock in the morning. Some call them witching hours. I don't have a name for them. I just know that's the time they look back. And once they see you, I drew something that wasn't there. "Hey, Noah, can you draw us?" My friend, Joey, practically begged me on his hands and knees, pulling his girlfriend close to him. Cindy nodded in agreement with her boyfriend's request. I raised an eyebrow, chuckling to myself. "You do realize you'll have to stand still for a while? I can only really draw still life stuff." They both shrugged it off, already sitting in a position they could hold for a while. I grabbed my sketchbook and got to drawing. It didn't take long to sketch out their forms, followed by the details that would make each of them unique: the freckles across Cindy's mouth, the muscles along Joey's arms, the way her hair sort of swirled like a tornado. As I leant back to take a peek at the finished product, I realized I had accidentally drawn Joey's hand on Cindy's shoulder. Or at least I thought it was Joey's. They were not even remotely similar. Unlike Joey's broad and large hands, the fingers on Cindy's shoulder were wrinkled, devoid of any moisture. Long, rotting nails jutted out like bones from the tips of its fingers, digging into Cindy's hot pink blouse. I looked over at her, but there was no hand to be there. Just as I went to erase the decrepit limb, Joey took the book out of my hand. Cindy looked delighted, clasping her hands together. However, as her eyes traced the drawing, she must have hovered over the rotting hand because her face fell. She pointed at it, causing Joey's expression to drop with hers. After a moment, his face lit up with laughter. Oh man, that actually freaked me out for a moment. You're such an artist. He squeezed her shoulders, smiling at me. Thanks, Noah. Cindy thanked me half-heartedly, not so psyched about the weird hand. As I tore the paper out of the sketchbook and handed it to them, I couldn't help but wonder why I drew that. I don't recall doing so, not consciously at least. In all likelihood, I did it because I saw someone hold something and that image stuck with me. I wasn't sure why the hand looked so twisted, but I wasn't going to question the coincidence. It was just one of those weird moments, nothing more. Still, I couldn't get the hand out of my head. On the bus back home from school, I pulled out my sketchbook and began doodling the girl sitting in front of me. I wasn't the type to do this, but I needed to see if what happened was just a one-time occurrence. The drawing started off fine. She was wearing a dark coat and was staring at the phone in her hand, brown hair draping over her face. That should have been all that there was. But my hand continued to move. I began drawing another figure, this one far more inhumane, with decomposing skin, gnarly bones protruding from underneath. Slowly, its form became more apparent. Though humanoid, it was obviously anything but human. It was perched on the shoulders of the girl, head tilted with curiosity as it watched whatever the girl's phone was playing. Where eyes should have been were instead replaced by hollow sockets, flies entering and exiting. Its mouth, agape and forever held in an expression of shock, seemed to sag, the skin connecting the jaw and the skull teetering on the edge of ripping apart. Despite the fact I couldn't see it, I was able to draw the thing with extreme detail. Each pore, each blemish, every wrinkle, each hair, everything about it was etched into the paper with perfect accuracy. Frantic, I flipped a page and drew the girl yet again, this time in far less detail. I realized that the constant scratching of lead on paper was disturbing the other passengers, but I couldn't stop. Once the silhouette of the girl was finished, my hands yet again moved on their own, muscle memory guiding each careful stroke. The creature was yet again seated on the girl's shoulders, only now it wasn't looking at the girl's phone. It was looking at me. One final time, I flipped the page and scribbled an incoherent mess that barely resembled the girl. But the feeling of needing to continue the drawing ceased, the thing moved. In that instant, I hopped off at the next stop and dashed for my home, cradling the sketchbook to my chest. I frantically looked around, drawing the scenery in the hope that I'll be able to find that thing again. Each time I did, it would be there, either waiting for me with a curious tilted head or running along the roofs on all fours, still glaring right at me. Eventually, I reached my house. Once I spun around and locked the door behind me, I made a quick sketch of the door. To my horror, the urge to continue drawing once I finished continued, and the ghastly expression was printed behind the window. Somehow, despite the fact it had no eyes, I knew that it was making eye contact. Scared beyond belief, I ran to my room, barricading it with my bed and dresser. Then, huddled in the corner on the opposite side of the door, I began filling the pages with drawing after drawing of the entrance. At first, there was nothing special in the first 30 or so pages. But then came those nails, those long, black talons that held the bottom of the door, trying to pry it open. It tried and tried, each drawing showing the thing's hands in a different position. I thought it would give up, but I'm on my third sketchbook now and it still hasn't let up. I'm writing this now to give my sore hands a break. It's beginning to wear the door down, nail marks cover the outer frame, splinters of wood are sticking out, and the paint itself has begun peeling away. Calling the police isn't an option, and the room doesn't have any windows.